Number 60-year-old is needed overseeing modern cybersecurity. The 28-year-old director merely laughed. Now, hand over your badge. They told me I was obsolete, a relic of a bygone era. Then they laughed, an arrogant, dismissive sound that echoed in that sterile conference room. But that laugh? It was the most expensive sound they ever made. This is the story of how I watched their multi-million-dollar empire crumble, one perfectly silent, perfectly legal domino at a time. If you're wondering how this all went down, grab a drink, maybe some popcorn, because this is a story about corporate arrogance, quiet vindication, and a 60-year-old man who knew exactly when to keep his mouth shut. My name is Arthur. And for 31 years, I lived and breathed cybersecurity, building the very infrastructure that protected sensitive government data. I got unceremoniously pushed out by a kid who just thought my age made me irrelevant. Turns out, my top-secret security clearance was the only thing keeping their most valuable government contract alive. I'm Arthur Sterling, 60 years old. I started in this field back when it was still called computer security, and most people didn't even know what a firewall was. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Air Force doing signals intelligence, then transitioned to the private sector. For the last 22 years, I've been the senior cybersecurity architect at Meridian Defense Solutions in Northern Virginia. We were a smallish contractor, about 340 employees, handling sensitive network security for various government agencies. I'd seen every type of cyber attack imaginable, worked through the Morris worm in '88, dealt with Code Red and NIMDA in 2001, helped redesign entire network architectures after the OPM breach in 2015. Every single crisis taught me something vital, every close call made our systems stronger, more resilient. The younger generation, they often think cybersecurity is all about flashy tools and automated dashboards. They're not entirely wrong, but the real work, the foundation, happens in the unglamorous, painstaking details. It's understanding legacy systems, knowing which vendors cut corners, recognizing the human patterns that precede most breaches. My specialty, my niche, was classified systems integration. That kind of work requires a TS/SCI clearance with polygraph. It's the kind of clearance that takes 2 years and about $50,000 worth of background investigation to obtain. The kind that maybe only 1.2 million Americans actually hold. I'd maintained mine for 28 years straight. Clean record, perfect compliance, never a single security incident on any system I architected. And that clearance? It was attached to every major contract Meridian held. Most importantly, it was attached to the Sentinel program, a massive $17 million Department of Defense contract for cybersecurity monitoring across 3 military installations. The contract language itself was crystal clear. It specifically required a TS/SCI cleared architect with at least 15 years of defense sector experience to maintain oversight. That, my friends, was me. Had been me since the contract started 7 years ago. The company knew this. HR knew it. Legal knew it. The original CEO who hired me knew it. Everyone who mattered knew it. Then, the original CEO retired. His replacement, Daniel Evans, came in. He was 52, MBA from Wharton, zero technical background, zero government contracting experience, but he had a vision. New ideas, digital transformation, whatever corporate buzzwords were trending that quarter. Part of that vision meant bringing in a new IT director to modernize operations. Enter Leo Walker. He was 28 years old, computer science degree from a decent state school, 4 years at a Silicon Valley startup doing cloud infrastructure. No government experience, no security clearance, no understanding whatsoever of how defense contracting actually worked. But he had energy. He had fresh perspectives. He had all the right buzzwords: AI integration, zero trust architecture, cloud-native solutions. Daniel loved him immediately. Leo started in early March. His first week was spent wandering around the building, introducing himself. Firm handshakes, big smiles, lots of talk about disrupting the status quo and challenging legacy thinking. He stopped by my office on a Thursday afternoon. I was neck-deep in reviewing network segmentation protocols for a quarterly compliance audit. Thrilling stuff. Leo leaned against my doorframe, casual, confident, with the posture of someone who'd never once been told no. He said he was excited to work with me, said he'd heard I was the longest tenured technical employee. He wanted to pick my brain about processes and systems. I told him I'd be happy to walk him through anything. Offered to schedule time the following week once he'd had a chance to review documentation. He nodded, like that was exactly what he expected. Then he glanced around my office at the framed certifications on my wall, the stack of technical manuals on my bookshelf, the Air Force Commendation plaque from 1994. Interesting setup you've got here, he drawled. Very retro. I let that one go. Figured he was just young, ignorant, and didn't know any better. The following weeks were revealing. Leo scheduled back-to-back meetings with every technical team, asking a lot of questions, taking copious notes, making grand promises about streamlining workflows and eliminating bureaucracy. He also started making changes. Small ones at first, replaced our ticketing system with some cloud-based platform his startup had used, changed the meeting schedule, restructured reporting lines so more people reported directly to him. Then came the bigger proposals, sunsetting our on-premise backup systems in favor of cloud storage, eliminating manual verification steps in our incident response protocols, suggesting we could save money by outsourcing our overnight monitoring to a third-party vendor in Eastern Europe. Each proposal arrived with slick presentations, detailed ROI calculations, and industry comparisons showing how other companies were already doing these things. What the presentations didn't show was context. The on-premise backups existed because certain classified data simply couldn't legally leave our physical control. The manual verification steps were explicitly required under 3 separate contracts. The overnight monitoring couldn't be outsourced because the personnel needed clearances that foreign nationals couldn't obtain. I raised these concerns in every meeting. Politely, professionally, with documentation to back up every single point. Leo would nod thoughtfully, thank me for my institutional perspective, then move forward with his plans anyway, just slightly modified to avoid the most obvious compliance violations. The old guard, us veterans, we noticed. Meridian had plenty of experienced folks who'd been doing government work for decades. We understood the rhythms, the compliance requirements, the careful documentation that kept contracts alive and auditors happy. Leo? He didn't understand any of it. He saw bureaucracy where we saw survival. He saw resistance where we saw protection. In April, he submitted his first big proposal to Daniel. A complete overhaul of our cybersecurity infrastructure, cloud migration, AI-powered threat detection, automated compliance monitoring. He claimed the whole thing would save $2.3 million annually and position Meridian as an industry innovator. The proposal was technically impressive, yes, but also completely, utterly impossible under our current contract requirements. Half the systems he wanted to migrate were bound by data residency clauses. The AI tools he recommended weren't FedRAMP certified. The automated compliance features would violate oversight protocols that required human verification. I pointed all this out in the review meeting. Calmly, professionally, with specific contract citations and regulatory references. Leo's expression shifted, just for a second. Then he smiled and said he appreciated the feedback but felt like we were letting legacy thinking limit our potential. Daniel nodded along, said we needed to balance compliance with innovation, said he trusted Leo to find creative solutions. The meeting ended. Leo didn't even look at me on the way out. 2 weeks later, I got called into Daniel's office. Leo was already there. So was Brenda from HR. Never a good sign when HR shows up unannounced. Daniel said they were restructuring the IT department, flattening hierarchies, eliminating redundant positions, making room for new talent that aligned with the company's evolving vision. My position was being eliminated. I sat there for a moment, processing. 31 years of service. 22 years at this company. Perfect performance reviews, 0 security incidents, 3 commendations from government clients, a shelf full of certifications I'd kept current because professionalism mattered. And they were cutting me loose because a 28-year-old thought I was redundant. I looked at Daniel, the man I'd helped navigate 3 major compliance crises. The company I'd protected during the 2019 contractor breach that took down 2 of our competitors. The position I'd held through 3 presidential administrations and countless policy changes. Leo spoke up, his voice measured, but with a smug undertone I couldn't miss. He said the cybersecurity landscape had evolved dramatically, that they needed people who could adapt to modern paradigms. He said my skill set was valuable, but no longer aligned with where they were heading. Then he said it. The line I'll remember forever. We don't need a 60-year-old overseeing cybersecurity. He actually laughed when he said it. Like it was obvious. Like my age was the whole argument, and nothing else needed to be explained. Like 6 decades of life experience and 3 decades of specialized expertise were disqualifications rather than qualifications. Daniel shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, but not objecting. Brenda looked at her notepad. Nobody defended me. Nobody pushed back. Nobody asked whether this might be a terrible mistake. Leo leaned forward. Hand over your badge. So, I did. I unclipped my ID badge from my lanyard. Set it on the desk. Didn't say a word about the Sentinel contract. Didn't mention that my TS/SCI clearance was the only thing keeping that $17 million deal active. Didn't explain that terminating the cleared architect of record required 90 days notice to the contracting officer per section 4.7.2 of the agreement. They hadn't asked, and I wasn't in the business of doing free consulting for people who had just fired me. Brenda handed me a folder, severance terms, 2 months' pay, benefits continuation through June, a non-disparagement clause that went both ways. I signed everything, shook hands, and walked out. My desk was already being cleared by security, standard procedure for terminated employees with clearances. I grabbed my personal items, the photos, the coffee mug my daughter made me in middle school, the small wooden box my wife gave me for our 25th anniversary. Michael Davis caught me in the hallway. He'd been my deputy for 11 years. A good man, a solid engineer. His face was pale. What happened? Restructuring, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Leo's vision doesn't include people like me. Michael's jaw tightened. That's insane. You're the only one who. I know what I am, I cut him off, putting a hand on his shoulder. You know where to find me if you need anything. I walked out of Meridian Defense Solutions at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. 31 years of service, 22 years of loyalty, gone in a 15-minute meeting. My wife, Sarah, was in the garden when I got home. She saw my face and knew immediately. Didn't ask questions, just made dinner and let me decompress. That night, I sat on the back porch and watched the sun go down. I thought about calling a lawyer, thought about fighting back. Then I thought about what Leo had said, and how Daniel had just sat there, nodding along. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Some, you just walk away from and let the consequences do the work for you. I'd given them everything they needed to destroy themselves. They just didn't know it yet. Saturday morning, I slept in for the first time in probably 15 years. No alarm, no urgent emails, no 6 a.m. calls about server issues or compliance deadlines. Sarah made pancakes. We ate on the back porch, something we hadn't done since the kids moved out. She asked what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know, probably rest for a few days, then figure out the next chapter. What she didn't ask was why I seemed so calm. After 35 years of marriage, she knew me well enough to recognize when I was processing versus when I was panicking. This, clearly, was processing. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael Davis. His message was short. Chaos here. Leo just realized something about the DoD contract. Won't say more, but thought you should know. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. The dominoes were already falling. See, here's what Leo and Daniel didn't understand about government contracting. Every major defense contract has something called key personnel clauses. These clauses name specific individuals whose qualifications and clearances are absolutely essential to contract performance. Remove those individuals without proper notification and approval, and you're in breach. The Sentinel contract had 3 key personnel listed: the program manager, the lead systems engineer, a woman named Deborah who'd been at Meridian for 16 years, and the cybersecurity architect of record. That last one, again, was me. Contract section 4.7.2 was explicit. Any change to key personnel required written notification to the contracting officer at least 90 days in advance. The notification had to include detailed justification, proposed replacement credentials, and a transition plan. The contracting officer had sole discretion to approve or reject the change. Leo had fired me on a Friday afternoon with 0 notice to anyone outside the building. No notification to the DoD, no proposed replacement, no transition plan. He'd also created another problem he didn't know about. The contract required the cybersecurity architect of record to maintain continuous active status. Any gap in coverage, even a single day, triggered an automatic contract review. If the gap exceeded 72 business hours without remediation, the contracting officer had the authority to terminate for cause. I'd learned all this the hard way over 22 years of defense work. Leo had learned none of it in his 4 years of Silicon Valley startups. By Sunday evening, my phone had 17 missed calls from Meridian numbers. I let them all go to voicemail. Monday morning came. I was reading the newspaper on the porch when my phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized, Robert Sterling, the DoD contracting officer for Sentinel. I answered. Mr. Sterling. His voice was tense but professional. I've just been informed of your departure from Meridian Defense Solutions. I told him that was accurate. He paused. Did you resign, or were you terminated? Terminated, I replied. Friday afternoon. Position eliminated as part of a restructuring. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Sterling, are you aware of the key personnel requirements under Sentinel? I told him I was very aware. I'd been the architect on that contract for 7 years. And Meridian notified us of this personnel change, he asked. I told him he'd have to ask Meridian that question. I wasn't privy to their communications after my termination. Robert sighed, a heavy, tired sound. Mr. Sterling. We received no notification, no replacement credentials, no transition documentation. As of this moment, Meridian is in material breach of Section 4.7.2. I expressed my sympathies, told him I hoped they could work it out. 20 minutes later, another call came through. Daniel Evans. I let it go to voicemail. His message was borderline frantic. Said there had been a misunderstanding. Said they needed to discuss the situation urgently. Said my expertise was invaluable, and they wanted to explore options for continuing our relationship. Translation: they just realized they were about to lose $17 million, and I was the only person who could save them. I didn't call back. By Monday afternoon, I had 3 voicemails from Leo. Each one more desperate than the last. The first was professional, said there had been an administrative oversight and they wanted to rectify it immediately. The second was apologetic, said he hadn't fully understood the contract implications and hoped we could find a mutually beneficial solution. The third was practically begging. Said he'd personally recommend reinstating me at my previous salary, plus a 15% increase, if I'd come back immediately. Funny how fast 60-year-olds stop being obsolete when your contract is on the line. I forwarded all 3 voicemails to my personal email for safekeeping. Then I went back to my newspaper. Tuesday morning, the official notification came. A registered letter from the Department of Defense. Meridian Defense Solutions had been found in material breach of contract Sentinel 7, Section 4.7.2, due to unauthorized removal of key personnel without proper notification or approved replacement. The letter gave Meridian 48 hours to cure the breach or face immediate termination for cause. My phone rang 18 times that day. Meridian numbers, unknown numbers, one from a DC area code that was probably their emergency legal counsel. I answered none of them. Wednesday morning, Michael Davis showed up at my house. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. "Arthur." He stood on my porch, looking utterly defeated. "They're going to lose the contract." I invited him in, made coffee, and let him talk. The story poured out of him. Monday had been pandemonium. Leo discovered the key personnel clause around 10 a.m. when the DoD started asking pointed questions. He spent 2 hours insisting it couldn't be enforced. Then he spent 4 hours trying to find a replacement architect with a TS/SCI clearance and 15+ years of defense experience. Turns out, those don't exactly grow on trees. Every qualified candidate was either already employed or required a 6-month clearance transfer process. Michael told me Leo had actually called a headhunting firm and asked if they could fast-track a clearance investigation. The recruiter just laughed and hung up. You can't fast-track federal background checks. Anyone who's worked in this industry for more than a month knows that. Daniel confronted Leo in front of the entire leadership team. Demanded to know why he hadn't researched the contract requirements before terminating essential personnel. Leo tried to blame HR for not flagging it. Brenda reminded everyone that she'd sent Leo a summary of key personnel designations during his very first week. Leo claimed he'd never received it. The email log said otherwise. The IT team pulled the records. The email had been opened. The attachments had been downloaded. Leo had even replied with a thumbs-up emoji and the words, "Got it, we'll review." He never reviewed it. Never even skimmed it. Just filed it away and forgot about it because compliance documentation was boring legacy thinking that didn't align with his innovative vision. By Tuesday, they were desperate. Started calling contractors, headhunters, former employees, anyone who might know someone with the right credentials. They found 3 candidates nationwide who technically qualified. One was retiring next month and refused to take on new contracts. One was under non-compete with a competitor. One was willing but couldn't start for 90 days due to existing obligations. The 48-hour cure period was impossible to meet. Michael finished his coffee, looked at me with exhausted eyes. "They're going to offer you anything to come back. Daniel authorized up to double your previous salary, plus a signing bonus. Leo's been told to apologize personally." I set my cup down. "Michael, I appreciate you coming here, but I signed a severance agreement. They paid me to leave quietly. I left quietly." "This is different," he pleaded. "The whole company is at stake. 340 people could lose their jobs if Sentinel goes away." That one stung a bit. Those employees hadn't done anything wrong. They were just caught in the blast radius of Leo's arrogance and Daniel's negligence. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I told Michael I'd think about it. He nodded. Didn't push. Just thanked me for the coffee and left. Sarah found me on the porch that evening. She'd heard enough of the phone calls to piece things together. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided yet." She sat down next to me. "That many people losing their jobs. That's a lot of weight." "It is," I agreed. "But they didn't care about my 31 years when they decided I was too old to matter. Why should I care about their problems now?" She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. Thursday morning, I got a call from someone I didn't expect. Eleanor Vance. She was the chief legal counsel at Meridian. We'd worked together on contract negotiations for 15 years. Respected each other professionally, even if we weren't close. "Arthur," her voice was measured, lawyer calm. "I know you have no obligation to speak with me, but I'm hoping you'll hear me out." I told her I'd listen. She laid it out plainly. The Sentinel contract was terminating at midnight Friday unless they could demonstrate immediate remediation. No other contract could absorb the revenue loss. They'd have to lay off at least 180 people within 60 days. She said she understood why I was angry. Said she'd reviewed the circumstances of my termination and found them deeply troubling. Said Leo had acted without proper authorization or due diligence, and Daniel had failed in his oversight responsibilities. Then she made the pitch. We're prepared to offer you full reinstatement at 2.5 times your previous salary, a 3-year guaranteed contract with termination protection, a formal written apology from Leo Walker, and a seat on the advisory board with input on all major strategic decisions. I let the silence stretch. She continued, we're also prepared to remove Leo from any supervisory role over your position. You'd report directly to Daniel. The same Daniel who sat there and let Leo fire me. Eleanor paused. Daniel has reconsidered his leadership approach in light of recent events. I told her I needed time to think. She said the deadline was midnight Friday. I told her I understood deadlines. After she hung up, I sat with it. The offer was substantial, more than substantial. It was an acknowledgement that they'd been catastrophically wrong and were willing to pay almost any price to fix it. But here's the thing about being publicly humiliated by someone who thought your age made you worthless. Money doesn't erase that. Titles don't erase that. Even apologies don't really erase that. Leo had laughed when he said I was too old. He'd laughed like it was a joke everyone understood. Like 60 years of life and 31 years of expertise were punchlines. I called my daughter that afternoon. Chloe lived in Boston now, a data analyst at a healthcare company. Smart kid, always had good instincts. She'd watched me navigate corporate politics her whole life, sat through enough dinner table conversations about work stress to understand how these things played out. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing the way she always did before giving her honest opinion. Dad, what do you actually want here? I want to never see Leo Walker's face again. Okay. What else? I want them to understand that experience matters. That you can't just throw away decades of knowledge because you're chasing some fantasy about innovation in youth. I want them to feel what it's like to need something they casually discarded. She paused. But do you want to go back? Like, actually work there again? Wake up every morning and walk into that building knowing what they did? I thought about it. Really thought about it. The building I'd walked into for 22 years. The desk where I'd solved 1,000 problems, the people I'd mentored, and the systems I'd built. The coffee machine in the break room that only I knew how to fix properly. Then I thought about Leo in the next office. Daniel in the corner suite. The HR meeting where they'd handed me a folder and shown me the door. The laugh. That dismissive, arrogant laugh. No, I finally said. I don't think I do. Then don't, she said, simple, like it was obvious. They made their choice, Dad. Now they get to live with it. You don't owe them a rescue. What about the other employees? What about them? Did any of them stand up for you in that meeting? Did anyone push back on Leo's restructuring? Michael did, afterward. Afterward doesn't count. If they wanted you there, they should have fought for you when it mattered. She had a point. A hard one, but a point. I called Eleanor back Thursday evening. Told her I appreciated the offer, but I wasn't interested in returning to Meridian. She was quiet for a long moment. Arthur, you understand what this means? I understand that your company made a decision, and now they're experiencing the consequences. That's not my responsibility to fix. I continued, 300 people will blame Leo and Daniel, not me. I didn't fire myself, Eleanor. I didn't ignore the contract requirements. I didn't laugh at someone's age like it was a disqualification. She didn't have a response for that. Is there anything that would change your mind? I thought about it. Actually thought about it. I'd consider consulting short-term. Enough to help you find a qualified replacement and manage the transition. But not as an employee. Not under Leo. And not under the terms we discussed. She asked what terms I wanted. I told her I'd need full autonomy over the transition process, a consulting rate of $450 per hour, a minimum 6-month engagement regardless of the contract outcome, and a written acknowledgement that my termination was improper, distributed to all employees. She said she'd take it to Daniel. Friday morning, 20 hours until the Sentinel contract terminated, Daniel called me personally at 7 a.m. First time we'd spoken directly since the termination meeting. "Arthur," his voice was rough, stressed. "I've reviewed your consulting proposal, and we accept all terms. Eleanor's drafting the agreement now. Can you come in this morning to sign?" I told him I'd be there by 10 o'clock. Walking back into Meridian felt strange. The same parking lot, the same security desk, the same elevator bank I'd ridden 1,000 times. But everything felt different. The looks from employees I passed, some sympathetic, some confused, some openly hostile, Leo's loyalists who still thought the restructuring was the right move. Eleanor met me in the lobby, walked me to a conference room on the executive floor. The agreement was already printed. 12 pages of legal protection and financial terms. I read every word, signed every page. Eleanor countersigned as corporate representative. I sat down the pen. "Let's talk about saving your contract." The next 3 hours were a crash course in everything Leo had ignored. I walked them through the key personnel requirements, the notification timelines, the cure provisions, and remediation options. The only path forward was a formal request to the contracting officer for an emergency extension. We'd need to demonstrate that a qualified replacement was in process and provide a detailed transition timeline with milestones and accountability measures. I knew 2 people who might qualify and might be available. Both former colleagues from previous companies, both retired but potentially willing to unretire for the right terms. I made calls, sent emails, pulled in favors I'd been saving for 15 years. By 4 p.m., we had a candidate. George Peterson, 63 years old, TS/SCI cleared, 28 years of defense cybersecurity experience. Retired 18 months ago, but bored out of his mind and happy to take on a new challenge. He could start in 2 weeks, pending administrative clearance transfer. I drafted the emergency extension request myself, detailing the circumstances, acknowledging the breach, and presenting the remediation plan with George's credentials and my interim oversight as consulting architect. Robert Sterling at the DoD reviewed it personally, called me directly at 8 p.m. "Arthur. This is highly irregular." "The whole situation is highly irregular, Robert," I replied. "I'm trying to minimize damage for everyone involved." He was quiet. "Then I can grant a 45-day extension contingent on verified progress. If Peterson's clearance transfer hits any delays, we'll need to revisit." I thanked him. I really meant it. The contract survived. Barely. Another 24 hours, and it would have been dead. I sent the confirmation to Eleanor at 8:47 p.m. She responded within minutes. A single line, "Thank you." That night, I sat with Sarah on the back porch again. Told her about the day, the agreement, the calls, the last-minute save. She shook her head. "You spent 10 hours fixing a problem they created by firing you." I did. "How does that feel?" I thought about it. Complicated. Satisfying in some ways, frustrating in others. But here's the thing. I didn't do it for Daniel. Didn't do it for Leo. Did it for the 300 people who needed jobs, and the 20 years of relationships I'd built with colleagues who deserved better than to be collateral damage. And I did it on my terms, at my rate, with my name cleared and my value documented in writing. That matters more than revenge, at least to me. The next 6 weeks were educational for everyone. I came in 3 days a week as a consultant. Set my own hours, reported to no one except the contract requirements. Leo avoided me like I was radioactive. Whenever I walked into a room, he found a reason to leave. Whenever we passed in the hallway, he studied his phone like it contained classified information, which, professionally speaking, I kind of was. The guy who'd almost cost the company everything. The cautionary tale that senior leadership referenced in every planning meeting. George Peterson's clearance transfer came through on schedule. Good man, thorough, methodical, exactly what the Sentinel contract needed. He'd spent 28 years doing the same kind of work I'd done. Knew the rhythms, understood the stakes, never once suggested that compliance requirements were bureaucratic obstacles to innovation. We had lunch together his first week, swapped war stories, discussed the contract requirements in detail. He asked good questions, took notes, followed up on every point. "This is how it's supposed to work," he said. "Experience teaching experience, knowledge transferring properly." I agreed. Told him I wished Leo had understood that. I spent most of my consulting hours documenting processes that existed only in my head. 22 years of institutional knowledge converted into procedures and playbooks that anyone could follow. The vendor relationships, the compliance shortcuts, that weren't actually shortcuts but looked like them to outsiders. The historical context for decisions that seemed arbitrary but actually prevented specific, documented problems. It should have been done years ago. Would have been if Leo hadn't decided that documentation was bureaucratic overhead instead of organizational survival. He'd actually cancelled a documentation initiative I'd proposed 6 months before my termination. Said it wasn't a priority compared to his cloud migration plans. The employees noticed the shift. People who'd been afraid to speak up during Leo's restructuring started asking questions again, pushing back on changes that didn't make sense, citing compliance requirements that the new regime had ignored. Michael Davis stopped by my temporary office one afternoon. Closed the door behind him. "Leo's losing support." He looked almost hopeful. "The board is asking questions about how this happened. Daniel's distancing himself." I'd heard similar things. Corporate survival instincts were kicking in. When a $17 million contract nearly evaporates because of one director's arrogance, people start looking for someone to blame. Leo was the obvious target. But Daniel had enabled him, had hired him without proper vetting, had approved the restructuring without checking contract implications. Had sat in that termination meeting and said nothing while Leo laughed about my age. They were both going to face consequences eventually. The board wouldn't let a near catastrophe go unexamined. 3 weeks into my consulting engagement, Daniel announced that Leo Walker was transitioning to a special projects role. No longer IT director, no longer managing any personnel, just working on undefined initiatives that everyone understood meant waiting out his severance clock. Leo's LinkedIn updated the same day. New title, Innovation Strategist. Same company, different reality. He never apologized to me directly. The written apology Eleanor had promised came from HR on company letterhead, corporate language, zero personal accountability. I framed it anyway. Hung it next to my Air Force commendation plaque. Week 5 brought another development. The board hired an outside firm to audit Meridian's contract compliance process. Standard response to a near miss of this magnitude. When you almost lose your biggest contract because of preventable negligence, investors start asking uncomfortable questions. The auditors spent 3 weeks reviewing documentation, interviewing employees, mapping personnel changes against contract requirements, building a comprehensive picture of everything Leo had touched since arriving. They found 17 other contracts with key personnel gaps or notification issues. Nothing as severe as Sentinel, but problems that would have surfaced eventually. One contract was missing required certifications for 2 employees. Another had documentation gaps that technically put us out of compliance for 3 months without anyone noticing. A third had personnel changes that should have triggered client notification but never did. Leo's fingerprints were on most of them. His restructuring had moved people around without checking contractual constraints. His push for efficiency had eliminated documentation that turned out to be legally required. His assumption that government contracting worked like Silicon Valley startups had created a minefield of compliance violations waiting to explode. The audit report was devastating. 63 pages of findings, 12 recommendations for immediate remediation, a detailed timeline showing how problems had accumulated under Leo's leadership. The report landed on Daniel's desk like a bomb. He read it twice, called an emergency board meeting, tried to spin it as institutional issues that predated his tenure. The auditors had included a section specifically addressing that defense. Most of the problems had been created in the past 9 months. All of them were traceable to specific decisions made by Leo and approved by Daniel. Within 48 hours, the board announced that Daniel Evans was stepping down as CEO to pursue other opportunities. Code 4, you're fired, but we're letting you pretend otherwise. He got a modest severance package and a non-disparagement agreement, probably more than he deserved. His replacement was someone I knew, Sandra Miller. She'd been the COO for 12 years. Solid, experienced, actually understood how government contracting worked. Her first act as CEO was to call me personally. "Arthur, I want you to know that what happened to you was wrong. Not just procedurally wrong, ethically wrong." I appreciated that. "I also want you to know that Leo's special projects role is ending. He's being terminated for cause based on the audit findings. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Finally, I want to offer you something. Not reinstatement, I know you're not interested, but a permanent consulting arrangement. An advisory role on all major contract decisions. Your rate, your hours, your terms." I told her I'd think about it, and this time I actually meant it. Sandra was different from Daniel. She'd earned her position through decades of competence, not MBA credentials and boardroom politics. She understood that age meant experience, not obsolescence. The Friday of my last official consulting week, I got an unexpected visitor. Leo Walker appeared in my doorway. First time he'd approached me since the day he'd taken my badge. He looked diminished somehow, smaller. The confidence that had radiated off him 3 months ago was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a minute?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down, didn't make eye contact right away. I wanted to apologize. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Not for the company letter. Personally. For what I said in that meeting. I waited. Let him sit in the silence. I was arrogant. He finally looked up. I thought I understood this industry because I understood technology. Turns out technology is maybe 20% of what actually matters here. The other 80% is relationships and compliance and institutional knowledge. Things that take decades to build. True, I conceded. The age comment. That was inexcusable. I looked at your experience and saw something outdated instead of seeing what it actually was. I was wrong. I studied him for a moment. This was either genuine growth or a calculated attempt to improve his professional reputation before hitting the job market. Maybe both. "Leo, I appreciate the apology. Genuinely. But here's what I want you to understand." He nodded, listening intently. "When you laughed about my age, you weren't just insulting me. You were dismissing everything I'd built. Every late night solving problems. Every crisis averted. Every relationship cultivated over 30 years. You reduced all of that to a number and decided it made me worthless." He looked down again. "That's not something an apology fixes. That's something you carry. And hopefully it changes how you approach people in the future. Because somewhere out there is another 60-year-old with 30 years of knowledge that you're going to need someday. And how you treat that person will define who you actually are." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up. "Thank you for hearing me out." He walked out. I never saw him again. 2 weeks later, I heard he'd landed at a mid-size consulting firm in the Midwest. Lower title, lower salary, building back from scratch. Some lessons, you just have to learn the hard way. 6 months after my termination, things looked very different. Sandra Miller had stabilized Meridian. The Sentinel contract was renewed for another 3 years with George Peterson as the primary architect. The compliance audit had led to comprehensive process reforms across every department. I'd accepted Sandra's consulting offer, 8 hours a week, advisory role on contract strategy and key personnel decisions. My rate stayed at $450 per hour. Do the math on that annually. One afternoon, Sandra called me into her office. "We're considering a new IT director hire." She slid a resume across the desk. What do you think? I reviewed it. 46 years old, government background, 8 years at a different defense contractor, 0 Silicon Valley experience. Looks solid, I said. She hired him the following week. His name was James Thompson. First thing he did was schedule one-on-ones with every senior technical employee. Second thing he did was read every active contract cover to cover. Third thing he did was ask me to lunch. I hear you're the reason this company still exists, he said over sandwiches. I'm the reason the Sentinel contract still exists. The company existing was a side effect. He laughed. Fair enough. I also heard about the guy before me, Leo Walker. Yeah. James shook his head. I looked him up. He's at some consulting firm in Ohio now. Junior role. Barely making 6 figures. Sounds about right, I agreed. James leaned back. You know what's funny? I applied for the IT director job here 8 months ago, before Leo got it. You're kidding. Nope. HR told me my background was too traditional. They wanted someone who could modernize the department. And now here you are. And now here I am, cleaning up the mess that modernization created. 3 months later, I got a letter in the mail. Formal correspondence from the Department of Defense. A commendation for my role in preserving the Sentinel contract and managing the transition to a new architect. Signed by Robert Sterling personally. I framed it, hung it next to the corporate apology letter and the Air Force plaque. A week after that, Michael Davis got promoted to senior systems engineer. He called to tell me the news. Sandra said she wanted people with institutional knowledge in leadership positions. He sounded almost emotional. She said you recommended me. I did. You earned it, Michael. Thanks for everything. Just do the job right, I told him. That's all the thanks I need. The following month, Meridian won a new contract. $23 million over 5 years, cybersecurity infrastructure for a different military branch. Robert Sterling had recommended us based on how we'd handled the Sentinel crisis. Sandra called me personally with the news. Arthur, we got it. Congratulations. No, she paused. Thank you. The DoD specifically cited our crisis response and transition planning as factors in their decision. That was your work. I just did what needed doing, I said, ever the pragmatist. You did more than that. You could have walked away. Let us fail. Nobody would have blamed you. Maybe not. But 300 people would have lost their jobs. She was quiet for a moment. I want to put your name on the new contract. As a senior advisor, paid position. Full benefits if you want them. I told her I'd think about it. That evening, Sarah and I had dinner on the back porch. I told her about the new contract, the offer, the commendation letter. She smiled. So, what are you going to do? Probably take the advisor position, work a few more years, help them build something that'll last after I'm gone. And then? Then what? She prompted. Then retire for real. Travel. Spend time with the grandkids when Chloe gets around to having some. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Sounds like a plan. What a wild ride, right? This entire experience taught me so much about arrogance, resilience, and the true value of quiet expertise. I'm still processing it all. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, where your experience was dismissed, or you had to choose between personal vendetta and a greater good, I want to hear about it. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments below, I'm reading every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and allows us to bring you more tales like this. Thanks for watching.